Hey everybody, welcome to Pig Dr. Osborne's Brain. Got a great show for you tonight. Before we get started, you guys know the drill. Tell me hello, let me know where you're tuning in from tonight. What part of the world are you visiting me from? Feed me and I'm going to feed you. Tonight we're talking all about a topic that is arguably one of the biggest problems in our society today, and that is estrogen dominance. Now, before I dive into estrogen dominance, it's important again that you understand that the things that I'm going to talk tonight about are a little bit touchy for some people. If you've got kids around, you might want to shush them out of the room. We keep the show family, fun, and clean, but there are going to be some things that I talk about. I just want to pre-warn you, if you've got kids in the room, you might want to just send them off to play somewhere else as we dive into tonight's topic. So, estrogen dominance. First of all, let's talk about what is that really, estrogen dominance. Estrogen dominance is when we're either overexposed to too many estrogens, meaning what we're producing internally, or we're overexposed to too many estrogens from synthetic or chemical versions of estrogen, what we take in exogenously. So things that we're exposed to from the outside world versus our own natural hormone production. But either way, an estrogen dominance occurs when the estrogen outbalances or overpowers or overacts some of the other sex steroid hormones and creates a plethora of different problems. I'm going to shove up on the screen here for you a diagram that lists out some of the more common symptoms of estrogen dominance. So let's put that up on the board for you so that you can kind of get a feel for, is estrogen dominance something you might be experiencing or something you might have experienced in the past? So number one, for many women, it's low libido. It's hair loss. It's poor sleep. You can develop dry skin. You can also develop irregular cycles. So ladies, irregular menstrual cycles, estrogen dominance can really influence the behavior of the menstrual cycle. It can cause increased cycles. So you can actually experience more frequent cycles. So shorter time frame, not a 28-day predictable cycle, but some women that have estrogen dominance will experience a couple of cycles a month, or will experience cycles more frequently than that 28-day interval that's very typical. Premenstrual symptoms as well. So we can kind of classify those into the same kind of category. PMS, premenstrual symptoms or syndrome. And this could have everything to do with headaches during a menstruation cycle, or bloating, or irritability, or mood swings, hot flashes, like all those classic, what many consider to be kind of the classic symptoms of menopause, but also of PMS. So like these symptoms can be manifestation of an estrogen dominance scenario. Another big one is weight gain. A lot of women with estrogen dominance will experience, especially fat storage around the central abdomen, what we call central adiposity, but in addition around the hips. So think about hips and waist. If you're struggling and you're putting weight on and you're not over consuming and you're exercising and doing everything and playing your part, like you may be suffering with estrogen dominance if the weight just won't come off from calorie control or from eating healthy. Additionally, brain fog and lack of memory. These are symptoms. So poor cognition, memory issues, you're losing memory. These are symptoms. Again, all of these symptoms of estrogen dominance. Guys, if you're paying attention, and most of the stuff is related to women, but if we look at men, what are the symptoms in men? A lot of times we'll get something called gynecomastia, which is you'll start growing breast tissue. So if you've ever seen a man actually start to grow what looks like female breast tissue, this is a sign of estrogen dominance in men. Men can also store excessive weight around the midsection when they're estrogen dominant. They tend to be weaker, not as strong. They tend to recover less in the gym. So poor recovery from workouts. Weight gain as well. Very common for men, as well as one other thing that happens then. These are like, think of these as manifest symptoms that you could complain of, but what some people experience is an increase in skin manifestations. There's actually something called a cherry angioma. Cherry angioma is like a little red freckle that forms on the surface of the skin. And these are a hallmark sign of estrogen dominance. So if you find little red freckles starting to appear all over your skin, and you've got a lot of these other types of symptoms, then again, you may be suffering with an estrogen dominance scenario. We'll also see estrogen dominance create thyroid problems. So it's, I'm going to put something up here on thyroid. So like thyroid dysfunction, but it's not so much that the symptom of estrogen dominance causes necessarily the thyroid issue, but it's very common for these two to kind of go hand in hand and have overlap with each other. So it's very frequent that we'll see women with estrogen dominance also being challenged by a hypothyroid scenario or a hypothyroid condition. So these are some of your biggest symptoms associated with estrogen dominance. Next, let's go into what actually causes estrogen dominance. I think this is a big one. This is the big important one, because obviously if you're struggling with these symptoms, what is it that's creating this struggle, right? And what can you do about it? So let's go into what causes the symptoms of estrogen dominance. So if we look at causes, well, one of the big ones, one of the big obvious ones is estrogen. Duh, right? You're probably saying, no kidding, Dr. Osborne, estrogen. This is estrogen dominance. But how many of you have a history of birth control pill use? How many of you have a history of taking the pill or taking estrogen-based medications to either skip your cycles, have less cycles, or to basically overcome like a polycystic ovarian scenario, or to overcome some type of fibroids, or to overcome some type of painful menstruation? So raise your hand in the room tonight. Let me know if you've taken estrogen, if you've got a long history of estrogen use. Just say estrogen. Just type in estrogen. Let's find out who you are. So estrogen use, prescription estrogen medications. Now, just so you know, studies show that 5 years or more of estrogen use from a drug perspective can increase your risk of heart disease, can increase your risk of stroke, can increase your risk of cancers. So keep that in mind. If you're younger, maybe you haven't had that 5-year history yet, maybe you want to start thinking about whether or not this is something you need to do and have that conversation with your prescribing doctor. We're going to talk about some solutions here shortly. But estrogen, again, taking estrogen is a big one. Now, a lot of times when women have a premenstrual problem, the premenstrual problem I said earlier, symptomatically, can actually be caused by too much estrogen. And here's the funny thing is that when you go see a doctor, a lot of times they don't test you. They don't test your estrogen level. They don't test your estriol or your estrone or estradiol or any of the other forms of estrogen or progesterone for that matter. A lot of the times what happens is they just simply put you on estrogen and say your symptoms sound like you need more estrogen, and they put you on the drug. Well, you could have too much estrogen. The doctor gives you estrogen thinking it'll solve your PMS problem. What he's actually doing is he's driving a greater degree of estrogen dominance. So you have to be real careful. My advice to any of you out there that are looking at potential for taking an estrogen is ask your doctor to measure your estrogen levels before you start taking it. Once you do start taking it, ask your doctor to monitor your estrogen levels, because it's real easy to get into a state of estrogen dominance when you're adding prescription medications into the mix. Now, one of the other causes of estrogen dominance, chemical exposures. We'll talk more about this in a moment, but there are a number of chemicals in the environment that mimic estrogen. They're called xenoestrogens. So if you've ever heard that term, xenoestrogen, these are chemical compounds that act like estrogen when you absorb them into the body. They can interact with estrogen receptors, creating estrogen-like responses, and that can be a big, big problem. There's actually new research showing that some of these chemical estrogens for females create an increased risk for cancer, create an increased risk for heart disease, create an increased risk for a number of different problems. And for men, increase the risk. There's actually some studies that show that chemical exposures early in life during sexual maturation can actually shorten penis length, can actually cause androgen problems where young men are not forming the androgens that are necessary to create a masculinization of them. So they're not maturing sexually. And, there's some evidence that is pointing to the possibility that are these chemical estrogens creating men that are less manly and even potentially creating a sexual disorientation. So, this is, just be very, very clear. This is not me picking on the gay community. This is me just pointing out what we know in research, and that these chemical estrogens for men can actually alter their androgen expression, leading to a failure to mature characteristically the way men mature through steroid hormones. Excessive body fat is another cause. Now, we said earlier that actually that gaining weight or weight gain is a symptom, but excessive body fat, and you could be skinny fat, excessive body fat can actually cause excess estrogen. And one of the reasons why is if you have too much body fat, there's an enzyme in body fat called aromatase. And what happens is this enzyme converts testosterone and androgens into estrogen. So the more body fat you have by percentage, the better your fat cells are at creating a estrogen from the androgens. And you don't want that type of scenario because these two kind of self-feed, right? When you have excessive body fat and you create too much estrogen, then you start gaining weight, and that weight gain creates a greater degree of excessive body fat. And this is why one of the best solutions, kind of one of the best interjections, if we're talking about like what can you do about it, is actually weight training. Weight training, not cardiovascular, running on a treadmill or riding on a bicycle for hours, but actually physically lifting weights to improve your muscle mass to reduce your body fat composition. Another big cause here is excessive carbs, but particularly refined sugar. We know that refined sugar, because of its impact on insulin and cortisol, what this does is it leads to hormonal changes that drive up estrogen. So excessive carbohydrates, again, through that hormonal change of insulin and cortisol, can actually create this scenario as well. We've got another one, and this one's going to ring true to a lot of you, and that's high stress lifestyle. So increased stress. And I'm not talking about the acute stress where, you have a problem, for one day. I'm talking about living stress every day, living out high long-term chronic stress. Chronic stress does the same thing to your hormones that cortisol does. And that refined carbohydrates do. So that chronic stress increases cortisol, insulin, causes elevations in blood sugar, and starts to impact and affect the way that you produce your hormones, can create an estrogen dominance scenario. And then another big one that we'll add to this list, and you'll see there are a couple of stars by it, and that's gluten. I have seen this time and time again. Women come to my office, men too, where they have a kind of a hallmark classic layout of estrogen dominance types of problems and symptoms. And we measure, always measure hormones when we start out. What we see is a huge disparity between estrogen and progesterone. There's actually estrogen dominance is one of two things. Either it means you're making too much estrogen, or you're getting too much artificial estrogen, or you're making normal amounts of estrogen, but you're not making enough progesterone. And so there's an imbalance. Remember, estrogen and progesterone balance each other out. And that happens, that low levels of progesterone, normal levels of estrogen can also create an estrogen dominant scenario. But I have seen gluten play out time and time again, where somebody has a gluten sensitivity and gluten is creating a disruption of their hormones, leading to an estrogen dominant state. And when we remove gluten from the diet, we see a full correction in that. So if you have not yet explored the no grain, no pain lifestyle, if you haven't checked out my book, if you haven't applied the diet and you're struggling here, this would be one of the best places that you can start, is start with diet change first. And so avoiding that gluten, because it's a major, major factor. That's why I put it on the list of the things that we know can cause estrogen dominance. So next, let's roll into, let me get some room on the board here. Let's roll into some of the chemicals that mimic estrogen, so you kind of have a better idea of where to look and what to avoid. Now, it's interesting in our world today, if we're talking about food-based chemicals, we're being exposed now to about 3,000 new chemicals in the food. So we're talking about food. And many of these chemicals are known estrogen mimickers. So they can mimic estrogen. Now, this is just in the food. So we haven't even gotten started yet on environmental chemicals. So there's about 30,000 chemicals that we're exposed to through air, through water, through industrialization and production, that have also estrogen mimicking types of effects. And so, we add all that together, there's over 30,000, about 33,000 chemicals that we're currently being exposed to, many of which have been identified as what I was talking about earlier over here as xenoestrogens, right? And we talked about chemical exposure. So let's talk about what some of those are. One of the big ones are your plastics. So, and the reason why is they contain a compound called a phthalate. A phthalate is a plasticizer. It's a petrochemical derived plastic that is designed to make things softer and bendable and pliable. So plastics, think of the plastic industry. So think about this in terms of plastic plates and bowls and forks and knives and spoons. Think of this as plastic Tupperware. So all those different plastics that you might store your food in or heat your food up on, those are potential problems. So again, plastic water bottles, probably the place where a lot of people get their exposure. Now, I know you're seeing right now, what you're seeing is this term BPA free. BPA free, BPA is one type of phthalate. Bisphenol A is only one type of phthalate. There are lots of phthalates, and just because it says BPA free doesn't mean you should use it. I see this all the time in people that carrying around their plastic BPA free plastic water bottles. Look, throw that thing in the garbage. Do yourself a favor. Don't allow it to leak estrogens, artificial estrogens into your body. Throw it away. Get you a glass one. Get you a stainless steel one made in the US, not made in China. Get you a good stainless steel or a good glass bottle that you can drink your beverages, your water out of. Preferably your beverage is water, because a lot of these other beverages are loaded with excessive carbohydrate, refined sugar, right? So preferably your beverage is water. Preferably you're not drinking it out of plastic, because that plastic's going to leach phthalates into the water, and it's going to create, again, a xenoestrogen dump into your bloodstream. We also see, though, cosmetics. So ladies, if you're wearing makeups, cosmetics, they contain phthalates. They contain xenoestrogens. Check your brand. Not all brands do, but many do. We talked about this already, but food storage. We've also got other things. Flame retardants. So now this you're not going to have so much control over, because when they produce mattresses, they soak them in a flame retardant. When they make curtains for a house, it's soaked in a flame retardant. When they're producing carpets and wood flooring and other things, building materials, they spray them with flame retardants like bromine or brominated substances that the whole premise of this is to prevent them from catching fire. And this includes clothing. So maybe you're buying new clothing at the store. Like, the best thing that you can do is wash before you wear. A lot of people will buy new clothes and then they won't wash them. They'll wear them first. And that's an example of how you might get some of these flame retardants directly on your skin and mass, creating a xenoestrogen-like effect. So you're going shopping, make sure you wash those clothes before you wear them. Now, one of the other places that we're going to find a lot of exposure to estrogen mimicking chemicals is we're going to get it in pesticides and fungicides and herbicides. So think of it as our modern farming practices dump a ton of this stuff onto the food. Now, how many of you, raise your hand if you want to eat your food with chemicals all over it? Hopefully nobody raises their hand. But if you're not buying organic, you're getting a lot more pesticide, herbicide exposure. Again, these things are mimicking estrogen, can contribute to an estrogen domination type of scenario where it creates health issues for you. So buy organic, kind of the solution here to avoid this problem. And so this goes back to how many of you are eating out. Like when you're eating out, a lot of people will eat out and they'll say, well, I select the healthy menu options when I eat out. I eat the salad. Yeah, guess what? The salad leaf is soaked in sugar. And if it's not organic, it's got pesticide on it. So now you've got, refined carbohydrate soaked, pesticide soaked lettuce leaf. That lettuce is no longer really good for you. So again, if you're eating out and you're not eating and you're not supporting like farm to table organic restaurants, then my advice is eat at home. You'll save money. You'll also save health, and you'll add years to your life. So pesticides, herbicides, flame retardants, food storage, cosmetics, plastics, any type of plastic container. And then we have another group that many people are guilty of, and that's these scented candles, these scented Glade plugins, scented Febreze, all that garbage that people spray or run in their house to make the bad smells not smell bad because they're masking it with chemical smells that have fragrances and aromas. These things you're breathing straight into your bloodstream because it's coming right into the olfactory nerve, hits your brain, and then hits your bloodstream. So a lot of these fragrant-based compounds, so you get in the worst thing when I travel, I get in an Uber car and they've got those Glade plugins in the air and they're just blowing it all over you. It's the worst thing. Those chemicals, remember, can mimic estrogen. You want to avoid them if at all possible. So use things instead of using those chemicals. Use things like natural essential oils that can still provide a nice aroma to your home, but don't actually overwhelm your body with artificial chemicals that mimic estrogen. Additionally, household cleaners. So, you should, if you haven't already, you should look at your household cleaners, because a lot of them, many of the chemicals in them also mimic estrogen, and go toward natural options. Citrus-based options are a good option for a number of your household cleaners, your dishwashing, your soaps, your detergents, etc. So, get those things out. And for those of you who haven't visited Gluten-Free Society, it's my foundation. You can check out, we have a list of a lot of these different companies and products where they're selling alternatives to some of these things. You should go check those out. If you're kind of scrambling and you don't know where to begin, we've got a list on Gluten-Free Society for you to help avoid that. So these are the big areas, the big kind of categorical areas where you're going to get exposure to chemicals that actually mimic estrogen. And again, we don't want that as females. Remember, the higher levels of estrogen you have, the greater risk of developing breast cancer. Some people say, why is breast cancer on the rise to such a great degree? This is one of the big reasons. We're being bombarded by xenoestrogens in our current modern environments. And look, the food manufacturers don't care. The chemical manufacturers, the companies that produce all this stuff, they really don't care. They're just trying to produce a product. They don't want to pull their products off the market because they're contributing to illness. They want to keep selling them. They don't want people to know that their products are estrogen mimickers. They just want to keep selling. They want to keep their business model going the way that it's going. You just have to, as a consumer, make an intelligent decision about whether you're going to want to support that while promoting a detriment to your health. So these are the big chemical exposures where we're going to get things that mimic estrogen. Let's talk next a little bit about some of the foods that can actually mimic estrogen. Now, I'm going to start by saying this list, it's a short list. It's not a comprehensive list. These are just some of the big ones. But it's also to say that sometimes a food that mimics estrogen, so foods that have natural estrogens, these are called phytoestrogens, P-H-Y-T-O, phytoestrogen. So if it comes from food, that's typically the derivative name that it's given is a phytoestrogen. Phytoestrogens are not necessarily bad. Now, if you're using a lot of soy and you're struggling with symptoms of estrogen dominance, and I see this often with vegans, where they're eating a lot of soy replacement products, soy meat-based products and soy, textured vegetable protein-like products, where they're creating an estrogen dominance. So it can be a bad problem, but some phytonutrients can actually have healthy, beneficial effects for people who have low estrogen. So again, if you don't fall in the estrogen dominance category, but maybe you have low estrogen, then some of these other foods might be helpful. Now, again, I don't recommend soy as a food source. If you read No Grain, No Pain, you'll know that soy is one of the kind of the taboo foods that I tell people to avoid, unless it's fermented soy, and unless your gut is completely healthy, I'd recommend that you avoid it. Now, the other reason I'd say avoid soy is because it's most of it, 99% of it is produced that is genetically modified, and it's loaded with pesticides and herbicides. So you don't want to get that in. But if you've got an organic tofu, because you're lacking estrogen and your gut's working really, really well, then that could be an option. Flax is another one. The lignans in flax have estrogen mimicking activity. This is some of the fiber in flax that can be beneficial. Sesame is another one, and so are apricots and peaches. So these things all have very mild estrogenic phytonutrient properties that can mimic estrogen. So again, if you're estrogen dominant, these are probably not going to be great food options for you until you get the estrogen dominance under control. So again, those foods are very, very common and very commonly eaten and can create problems. So you just have to be careful. Okay, let's talk about solutions. A lot of what I've already talked about, you could probably surmise what the solutions are, but I would be remiss if we didn't have just a conversation about those solutions. So, in diving into some of the solutions, I'm going to get a little biochemical here, just so that I can get you a good, thorough education and kind of background on nutritional relationships with estrogen and how estrogen is properly metabolized, just so you have a better understanding of it. But I want to give you practicality first. So I'll give you practicality, then we'll dive into the biochemistry for those of you who really geek out on the biochemistry stuff. So number one, what can we do? What to do to reduce naturally the estrogen load, right? So if we're trying to reduce that estrogen load, what are some things that we can do? Number one, lift weight, weightlifting, not cardio. Cardio doesn't do much in this regard. We want weight-bearing exercise, and it doesn't have to be heavy weight. You don't have to go and put 250 pounds on a squat rack and try to squat it. We're talking about body weight activity. You've heard me talk about high-intensity interval training before. This is things like push-ups and squats and sit-ups and lunges and jump rope and burpees and plank holds, like body weight stuff that is weight bearing, that's going to help build some muscle. Why do we want to build muscle? Because muscle speeds up the metabolism and the metabolic rate, which burns that fat. Remember, the more fat cells, the more fat you have, the more you cycle your androgens and aromatize them into estrogen, creating an estrogen dominant scenario. So there's a lot of research behind weightlifting being a very, very important part of overcoming estrogen dominance. Now, some of you may be asking, I'm tired all the time, my muscles hurt, I can't really exercise. Like, if you're that person that's exercise intolerant, then what I would suggest that you do initially is get in the pool and do some, low gravity, almost zero gravity type of activity. Get the muscles pumped and moving. And as you work toward improving your pain scenario, you can start slowly adding in the activity, the weight-bearing component. Number two, it's a micronutrient-dense diet. And I'm going to really go into detail about why this is important. You want food that's rich in vitamins and minerals. That's what micronutrients are, vitamins and minerals. Okay? If your diet is highly processed, it's going to be low in vitamins and minerals. If your diet's low in vitamins and minerals, your body's not going to be able to properly metabolize the estrogen into water-soluble forms that you can excrete and get rid of. So very, very important that you have a micronutrient-dense diet. Now, part of that's going to be eliminating sugar. So no sugar. Now, a lot of you are going to say, well, it's holiday season, come on, no sugar, that's not realistic. It better be realistic. If you want to get healthy, you got to get serious about it. That's why we're gluten-free warriors. That's why we're health warriors, not like health couch potatoes. We got to take that sugar part seriously, because that refined sugar is one of the worst things that you can put in your body. Now, fruit sugar is a different matter, but refined sugar, processed sugar, we want to get it out. Number four, eliminate grain. I said it earlier, gluten is one of the causes. So we got to get those grains out of the diet if we want to get that hormone balance back. Number five, eat organically. We said this earlier, the pesticides are estrogen mimickers. And so if you're consuming a lot of food and you're not using organic foods, then you're going to run into the problem of that exposure. And this includes, so like if we're talking about meats, so if you're not a vegetarian and you're eating meats, that needs to be hormone-free meat. So a lot of your meats, where we get a lot of our exposure to hormones is in meat. So make sure that with your meats, you follow the kind of the 3 cardinal rules: grass-fed, free-range, organic, or wild game. If you have hunters in the family and you like wild game, more power to you. Eat more wild game. Okay, so that if you're eating those meats, make sure they're free-range, organic, grass-fed. Okay. Number 7 on the list is to minimize caffeine. Caffeine is a diuretic. And I'm saying excessive caffeine here, not, some of you may drink a cup of coffee, some of you may drink tea, and you get some natural caffeine that way. You get some natural caffeine in chocolate. That being said, I'm talking about excessive caffeine. What does excessive caffeine look like? 150 milligrams of caffeine or more per day. Now, a cup of coffee is about 100 to 120 milligrams of caffeine, depending on the size. And I'm talking about a 6-ounce cup, not the big 12 ounces or 24 ounces. If you're doing those, you're getting 300, 400, 500 milligrams of caffeine. If you're doing Monster drinks or these energy drinks, you're getting several hundred milligrams of caffeine. If you're the pot a day type of coffee drinker, you're way overblowing your caffeine budget. Remember, caffeine has some health properties. There are some benefits to caffeine, but when you go over that 120 kind of milligram per day marker, it turns into a diuretic. It causes nutrient loss. Caffeine stimulates cortisol and adrenaline excretion, drives up insulin and blood sugar, and can create all kinds of problems. So you've got to be real careful with excessive caffeine. So caffeine, control it. Okay. Number 8, alcohol's out. If you're suffering with estrogen dominance, you want to get the alcohol out. The alcohol slows down the liver. It's very important that you understand that the way estrogen is metabolized, when your body produces estrogen and the way it gets rid of estrogen so that you're not developing estrogen-based cancers, heart disease, and other problems, is it is metabolized in your liver. There's 2 different types of metabolic function the liver has. It's phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification in the liver help to break estrogen down. Remember what alcohol does. Alcohol bogs the liver down. It basically hijacks those detoxification pathways, and it slows down your body's ability to metabolize your estrogen, hence creating an estrogen scenario in your body that increases the risk of estrogen-based diseases. You don't want that, so get that alcohol out. And the same thing goes for any other medications or drugs that slow down liver detoxification. Now, if you're on a prescribed medication, talk to your doctor about how that medication is metabolized. If it's metabolized in the liver, have a conversation about how you might be able to get off of that medicine. Remember, most medicines, they don't really treat the origin of a disease. They mask the symptoms that you're experiencing to improve your quality of life. So if you, for example, are on a blood pressure medication that's metabolized by your liver, you can naturally lower your blood pressure through a number of these things that we're talking about, right? So if you can do that naturally, then you can also look at asking your doctor to help you wean that medicine down in a way and get it off your liver, get that medication pressure out of your liver so your liver can function properly. Remember, we got enough garbage in the food, we got enough garbage in the air and in the water, 33,000 chemicals plus that we are being exposed to, that our livers have to help us to detoxify. And if you're voluntarily putting more chemicals in, it's going to make this process much, much harder to achieve good health. Number 9 is fiber. Make sure you're getting plenty of fiber. Now, the general rule of thumb is 35 grams a day or so of fiber intake, and this can come from soluble, non-soluble fibers. One of the properties of fiber is that it increases good bacteria and helps with the production of a chemical in the GI tract called glucuronidase. And this chemical is very, very effective at helping you metabolize and to get rid of excessive estrogen. So fiber helps to feed that process. So it's very, very important along those lines. And then number 10, if we're rounding out the list here to the top 10 to-dos, that is to manage stress. Now, it's easier said than done, right? It's easy for me to state, hey, don't be stressed out. It's harder for you if you are stressed out. But remember that a lot of people's stress comes from their poor health. And a lot of people's poor health comes from their decisions. And so if you change your decisions, you can change your health, you can change your stress. It's not going to happen overnight, but a lot of the way that people experience chronic stress is because they have poor management of their diet, poor management of their exercise, poor management of their time, poor management of their life as a whole. And so getting a hold and kind of analyzing these things and seeing where your weaknesses are is a very good first step at kind of getting control of your stress. One of the things I have seen where people are stuck in a job that they hate, or a job where their boss is a bear, and so they're miserable. Every day they go to work for 8 hours and they're kind of in fight or flight mode because of the stress of the job. Look, if you're in that type of scenario, it's time to career hunt. It's time to career change. Don't wait around until your health is totally destroyed and then you have to collect a disability check and you can't function. Like, let's get you planning ahead. If you're in that type of scenario, try to create an exit strategy that doesn't financially bankrupt you, and that may take some time. So all this requires some planning, all this requires some thought, all this requires diligence and action taking on your part. And so you want to make sure that you take it all to heart, because it's all important. So these are your top 10. Let's talk a little bit about this micronutrient section and kind of why that's important. Micronutrients, probably one of the least well-discussed topics in health today. People, kind of glaze over the importance of vitamins and minerals. You hear things like, oh, B vitamins are good for energy, and they just kind of glaze over it, and they don't, give you much more than that kind of generic, oh, it's good for you, therefore you need to take 50 supplement pills a day. I want to just reemphasize something to you all. Taking pills is not the solution. Even if you're taking, natural pills, even if you're taking supplements that, let's just say, are not drugs for the intent of helping your body, it's still not the long-term solution. These things are the long-term solution. The supplements should be used as kind of tools to help dig you out of a hole faster. But remember that these behaviors, if you have them consistently, you'll require less pills, including supplements. So the goal over the long haul, over the long term, is to reduce your need on supplementals and to have a diet that's conducive to your good health. Now, some of you with gluten-induced damage to the GI tract, where you've got scarring or villus atrophy or whatever, where you're still malabsorbing even though you're following and adhering to a strict gluten-free diet, that may not match you as much, because you may need nutritional support because you've got that GI damage that's scarred, or that's more of a permanent damage in nature. And so those of you with that type of scenario might need more supplementation. But if you're not that person, if you don't have that issue, follow these things, and let's talk about why. If we look at estrogen metabolism, I want you to understand that all sex steroids, not just estrogen, but all sex steroids, come from the mother hormone, cholesterol. Cholesterol is the mother hormone, and this is why we've talked in the past about people demonizing cholesterol, calling cholesterol bad. LDL cholesterol, bad cholesterol, is the precursor to make all of your hormones, and one of the first one that's produced is progesterone, and then through a couple of other conversions, we ultimately get to estrogen. Okay, so cholesterol and then several nutrients play a role in the metabolism of cholesterol and the progesterone and DHEA, dehydroepiandrosterone, and some of the other hormones like 17-hydroxyprogesterone, and then from progesterone we can make different androgens, and those androgens then can convert to estrogen. And there's three predominant forms of estrogen. There's E1, there's E2, and there's E3. And E1 and E2 your body can make E1 estrone, and then it can convert estrone into estradiol, but it can also convert estradiol back into E1. So your body can kind of go back and forth between these two. But E2 and E1, both of them can produce E3, and this is kind of a one-way reaction in that regard. And so these processes, let's talk about, okay, once you get to estrogen, and when I talk about estrogen, I'm really referring to one of the functional forms of estrogen, estradiol, because this is the main form of estrogen in the blood that has most of the estrogenic-like effect on the body. So to get from here down to here, requires nutrients. It requires micronutrients. And so how do we metabolize properly? How do we get from here to the estrogen? And then how do we get the estrogen to metabolize out of the body so that we're not creating estrogen dominance? So let's start up here with some of the nutrients that are required in this process. And one of them is vitamin D. Vitamin D is critical in the proper production of cholesterol getting to estrogen. The other are your B vitamins. And in particular, B6 and B5 play a very big role in this process of getting you from that cholesterol, that master mother hormone, to your functional estrogen. But what happens here is that we have to metabolize that estrogen out. So we metabolize that estrogen into other forms of estrogen, and this has to be done in the liver. So this is what I was talking about earlier, is we convert these estrogens through the liver into water-soluble versions that then we can excrete out through urination predominantly, or through sweat. And so if your liver's overwhelmed, if your liver is not working properly, phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification in the liver require micronutrients. And so there are a number of different nutrients that are required by your liver to properly detoxify. B2 is one of them. Selenium is another one. I'm abbreviating selenium as SE here. And cysteine and glutamine and methionine. If you've ever heard of SAMe, S-adenosylmethionine, it's a form of methionine, and glutamine, like these are necessary for your liver to properly function. Then there are other plant-based nutrients like alpha lipoic acid is very important for this process. Zinc is very important for this process. So you've got a lot of nutrients that your liver needs to properly be able to metabolize estrogen into its valid form. So once we get estrogen, there's an intermediary step. So we metabolize that estrogen, and that estrogen is in a number of different forms. There's actually about 6 additional forms of estrogen, depending on how it's broken down in the liver. And these forms of estrogen require additional metabolism, but some of them require, you've probably all heard of methylation before. The process of methylation is very, very important for metabolizing out active estrogen metabolites that increase the risk for cancer and heart disease. Methylation, this process here of methylation in the body requires very specifically folate. This is why you'll see a lot of the products, the supplements on the market for estrogen contain folate. You'll see they contain B12. A lot of them will contain choline. It's because these nutrients are necessary for the methylation process. And that's, in essence, you need these nutrients to properly methylate, because methylation of estrogen is a very, very important part of how we get rid of it. But there's another enzyme, there's another step called COMT. So once we metabolize estrogen, we have one more step to make to get it out of the body. There's an enzyme, and you may have heard of the COMT gene. Catecholomethyltransferase is the name of that gene. And so this enzyme helps to final stage estrogen into a form where we can excrete it. And this enzyme is magnesium dependent. In essence, we need magnesium for it to be properly metabolized, for that gene to properly work, so that we can finally get to an estrogen that's capable of being excreted out of the body without hurting the body or increasing the risk of developing different types of cancers. So if you don't have that micronutrient dense diet, you can just see, and this is a rudimentary drawing here, but vitamin D, B vitamins, B2, B5, B2 here, selenium, cysteine, methionine, glutamine, folate, B12, choline, magnesium, all necessary for the proper production of estrogen and then for the proper breakdown of estrogen, so that we can metabolize it out of the body so that it doesn't hurt us or do more harm in the process. So all that's necessary, and that's why we want a micronutrient-rich diet, because if we've got a diet that's high in refined food and low in nutrient density, that estrogen is going to get trapped. It's going to increase our risk for estrogen dominance diseases, and that is going to land you in hot water. So let's open the floor up for questions that any of you might have. Let's pull those up. Okay, let's back it up. All right. Let's see. What? Okay, so this one not necessarily. It kind of matches, but the best form of copper. There are a lot of different forms of copper: copper gluconate, copper glycinate, copper citrate. I mean, as long as it's an amino acid chelate or a good Krebs cycle chelate, copper in any of those forms is going to be a decent form. Let's see. Laura says, I'm postmenopausal and have every one of those symptoms. Yeah, so you can be postmenopausal. And a lot of people say, well, postmenopausal means you're not making estrogen, right? You still produce some estrogen from your adrenal glands. Remember that even after menopause, when your ovaries shut down and they're not really producing estrogen anymore, your adrenal glands can still produce it. But all those other things we talked about as well, all those xenoestrogens, those environmental estrogens can create an estrogen dominant scenario as well, even postmenopausally. So you've got to keep that in mind. You'll see. You wants to know: could estrogen deficient be the cause of low weight? Could an estrogen deficiency be the cause of low weight? It could be, but it's more common that we're going to get weight gain as opposed to weight loss. Yeah, I agree, Karen. How about feminism in men not on their own doing? I agree. I think a lot of the we're seeing this. There's actually some really interesting research that happened over 50 years ago. If any of you ever want to read it, it's a very good read. It's called Pottinger's Cats. Now, Dr. Francis Pottinger did research study on cats. If you've ever heard of the Price Pottinger Foundation, Pottinger is the doctor. The Price, Dr. Weston Price, and then there's Francis Pottinger. But anyway, Pottinger studied cats, and what he found in these cats is that feeding them highly processed food led to, in the males, it led to female characteristic development. So the males actually started to behave like females. Their bone structure started to change and morph into more feminine shape. And the opposite was true with females. Now, in essence, females started to act more masculine. They had more masculine behaviors and started to develop bony structural changes comparable to males. So this was studies, research done in cats being fed highly processed food diets. I think we're seeing the same thing play out in humans. I think we're seeing the highly processed food diets combined with the xenoestrogens create a demasculinization of our entire society and a masculinization of many women. And I think that's why a lot of women struggle with weight gain. A lot of women struggle with the symptoms of hyperandrogenism, with the facial hair and the hirsutism and some of the other things. So, it definitely, I think it's creating a major issue in the way our sex characteristics are developing as a society. Let's see here. What about deodorants? Do they contain estrogen? Some of them can. Again, it goes back to reading. A lot of them are petro-based. So, if you're using natural deodorants, like natural coconut or natural jojoba oil or, like natural rock salt types of deodorants, no, those generally don't. But you might be using one that does. So I would just, again, read that label and double check. Do hormones play a role in PCOS, or is it just insulin? Since I went off sugar and grains, it got much better. Just wondering what else I can do. Yeah, so hormones do play a role in PCOS, but remember, insulin is a hormone. So the big hormones in PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, has a lot to do with cortisol and insulin. But remember, cortisol and insulin are going to have a later impact in creating an estrogen dominant scenario that feeds excessive body fat, that then feeds excessive estrogen. So it does play a role. What you can do, what you really can apply, is you can apply these 10 factors that I talked about tonight. If you're following a no-grain diet, that's perfect, but just add these other 9 to it. Do antiperspirants increase estrogen in men? Depends on which one you're using. Antiperspirants, deodorants, have a lot of different chemicals. So looking at the list of chemicals and ruling out whether or not any of them have estrogenic activity is a smart thing to do. Reduced estrogen with diet change and exercise. I don't see the question in that. Okay. Can you say something for healing cachexia? So if we're talking about cachexia, are we talking about cachexia of cancer or just cachexia as in wasting? Because if we're talking about healing cachexia, the wasting scenario, first things first, more of a liquid diet, like really easy to digest foods that are not going to be in mass, hard to digest and hard to process. Because a lot of people with cachexia have cachexia because the drugs they've been taking for cancer completely destroyed their GI tracts and made them begin to malabsorb, and so they started to waste away as part of the side effects. So maybe clarify that for me, George, and I can give you a more specific answer. What about estrogen dominance and endometriosis? Yes, estrogen dominance can contribute to endometriosis. So beyond that, I don't know what your question is, but yes, if you have an endometriosis situation, it's generally an estrogen dominant as a kind of an underpinning to that. So if you apply what we've talked about tonight, that should put you in good position to help support that problem. Okay. Is weightlifting useful for a 60-year-old? Yeah, especially useful for a 60-year-old. One of the most amazing things I've seen is, I think she was like 97. It was a Japanese woman. She scrambled up the tree like a squirrel, and the reporters were just slack-jawed when they saw her do that because she was really nimble, like a little kid. And so when she came down, the reporter was like, "Wow, how did you do that?" And her answer was so simple. She said, "I never quit." So think of that in terms of being 60. A lot of people use age as their excuse. Don't use your age as a crutch. Don't use your age as an excuse. Aging doesn't mean sicking. Getting sick is not the same thing as getting older. A lot of people look at those two and they hold them as synonyms. Like aging is not becoming ill. Aging is basically, if you're developing illness as you age, it's because you're accumulating damage as you age. And so if you change your behaviors, you change the damage and you allow your body to heal and repair. So bottom line is you should be weightlifting as long as your body is capable of weightlifting. Now, the quantity of weight doesn't have to be exorbitant. What I'm saying that is a body weight exercise is enough. A lot of people overdo the weight and they overstrain their joints. You don't need to do that. Body weight calisthenics is a great way to get weight-bearing activity on a regular basis, probably one of the most effective. Yeah, eat more cruciferous vegetables. Yeah, cruciferous vegetables contain a compound called DIM, which helps modulate estrogen. So that is a strategy as well. What is the different fibers? Well, there's a lot of different fibers. There's pectin fiber, there's lignin fiber, there's plant-based non-soluble fibers, and they're all really going to be good to feed your microbiome to help with this process. Let's see, had parietal cell antibodies. No, that's, let's see, with no antibodies. Best copper supplement. Citrate is fine, Juan. Citrate, I think I answered that a minute ago. Let's see, Marvin says, Dr. O, I have all these vitamin mineral deficiencies and battling a fungal infection and benzodiazepine taper. I have all the MTHFR gene defects. Why can't I tolerate the supplements? A lot of people with a methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase gene issues do poor when you put them on heavy doses or heavy quantities of the methylation vitamins, like the B vitamins, like the methylfolate, the methylcobalamin, etc. And so other forms, non-methylated versions might be better for you, Marvin. But in addition to that, it sounds like, my experience in people that don't tolerate supplements well, almost always exclusively, is because they're in a moldy environment. So there's some type of mold toxicity issue. Now, a yeast overgrowth is mold. So you can have a mold issue inside you, growing inside of you, but you can also have an external mold issue. So if you've got mold in your home, or if you live in a high humid area where there's a lot of mold in the environment, that can also be one of the areas where people will struggle when they have that combination of different problems. Let's see. Biomedical or bioidentical hormones and estrogen dominant. When I tried to go down on estrogen, I started losing hair. How can I do this so that it doesn't create a hair loss? So one of the things that you should probably do is measure your protein if you haven't already. A lot of women, when their estrogen is low and they're trying to taper, what they don't realize is that they're actually eating a protein poor diet. And so some of the hair loss is actually stemming or could be stemming from that. So I would suggest you count your carb, fats, and proteins in grams. And if your protein level is below 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, then you're probably not getting adequate protein to maintain good solid hair growth as you try to make that transition. The other thing is you might get with your doctor and make that transition a lot more slowly. So like wean off of that estrogen a lot more slowly and give your body a little time to respond. Nancy wants to know, what about a desiccated supplement for adrenals? I feel sick when I take. Could these cause estrogen dominance? They shouldn't, not if they're just desiccated adrenal issues. But, you know, again, the kind of the general rule of thumb is if a supplement makes you feel sick, you're probably right, and the supplement's probably wrong. So don't force it. You know, don't force it. Talk to that doctor who recommended that supplement to you and make some adjustments. So Flower wants to know, my mom is menopausal and suffered from endometriosis and fibroids for decades. Is this protocol an estrogen detox? No, I'm not a big fan of detoxes. I believe that life should be your detox, like your decisions every day should lead to your body being able to properly detoxify on a regular daily basis, as opposed to hammering you with a massive detox where we're trying to get your body to work better than it's capable of working because it's been so destroyed for so long. So think of this protocol not as an estrogen detox. Think of it more of as maybe an estrogen reset, where you're taking corrective actions and behaviors that consistently, when applied, will help to rebalance your hormone levels without having to do a massive detox. So For Veritas wants me to talk about endometriosis and fertility. So go back in the archives, For Veritas. We have a show on that topic already that you can pull out of our archives and watch, and you can share that with your family members. So those of you who don't know how to find our archives, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/glutenology. And make sure that when you're subscribed, you go into our playlists and you can check out all the different playlists. But if you look in our Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain playlist, you'll find that show in the archives. Same thing with hair loss. I've done an entire show, multiple shows actually, on hair loss. So you can check that out, Nara. Let's see. What? Mold issues for those who can't tolerate supplements? Wow, never heard of that. Yes, it's true. I have candida and have had issues taking too much supplements in the past, not so much since being more healthy. Yeah, again, mold is a big problem for supplement tolerance. Let's see. Rosemarie wants to know, can estrogen dominance cause breakthrough bleeding after menopause? Yes, it can. So get that checked out. Breakthrough bleeding after menopause isn't good. Kayla says, is steal okay? What do you mean, Kayla? What do you steal, as in the metal, or stealing as in taking? Help me understand your question a little bit better. Is copper okay? Oh, maybe you're talking about cookware. I don't like cooking with copper. Copper toxicity can be a problem for some people. My favorite is a cast iron with an enamel in it, like an enamel cast iron. La Crusette's a good brand. Stainless steel is also a good option for cookware. There are a number of good brands. La Crusette is no, not La Crusette. That's cast iron, but All-Clad is a pretty good brand of stainless steel cookware. How about sardine cans? Yeah, so not just sardine cans, but any cans. A lot of cans, tin cans, are lined with BPA liners. And so going back to I erased it already, but going back to what I was saying about the phthalates, if the plastic or the tin can has a phthalate liner, that's a problem too. So that's something that you really want to look into. A lot of the cans now are being made without those, or a lot of them are, whereas before they were. So check for brands that they're health conscious enough to kind of get rid of those. I love it. Bobby says, no couch potato warrior here. Misty, Doc. Misty here representing the scleroderma and functional medicine community. Hi, Misty. Thanks for tuning in. Let's see. George, again, the question's coming up on cachexia. And so I can say an awful lot about cachexia, but your frame of reference will help me answer that question a lot better. Calcium D glucarate not glutarate, but glucarate, June, is what you're wondering about. And this is a supplement that can help. And a lot of your estrogen dominance formulas, nutritional support formulas, do contain calcium D-glucarate, and it's perfectly fine to take. If you have MTHFR or COMT SNPs, I'm going to say something about this, June, because a lot of people put too much credit on their SNPs. Don't give your genes the credit. Give your behaviors the credit. Like these things right here represent 80% of your outcome. The gene mutation is like 20%, so it's a small amount. Yes, is it important? Yes. If you have a mutation, could it play a role? Does it contribute to predisposition to a problem? Yes, it can, but don't give it more credit than these things. These things are first. So many people are reading all this stuff on genetics and are trying to pump supplements to help their genes work. A lot of you don't realize this, but I was actually one of the original, I brought to the market almost 20 years ago, one of the original genetic supplement or genetic testing companies, because I thought there was so much promise in nutrigenomics. And what I found is that genetic testing played such a small role in clinical outcomes. Meaning if we applied the lifestyle piece, then the genes made less and less of an impact on a person's overall health. So I don't want you guys that have the MTHFR, the COMTs, or the Mayo gene mutations to like be so paralyzed by the fact that you have those mutations that you fail to take serious action, because it's in the action taking. The action taking itself is where the magic happens. The gene mutation is, that's after you've taken all the action and maybe you hit a plateau, and those plateaus are subtle. They're not major illness anymore. They're subtle plateaus that can be tweaked now with some nutrigenomics, but don't start with nutrigenomics and fail to do the behavior. The behavior is the most important change you can make. Let's see here. Is magnesium best taken in the morning with vitamin D and K, or at night to help with sleep? Depends on whether or not you need it for sleep, but you can take magnesium throughout the course of the day. If you're trying to get better sleep and use magnesium as a sleep aid, then obviously you want to take it about an hour before bedtime. But you don't have to take it with vitamin D and vitamin K, not simultaneously. You'll absorb it just fine either way. Is there any way to increase progesterone to balance out the estrogen? Yes, there is. You need zinc to make progesterone in a big way. You need vitamin D to make progesterone. Some people find that yam-based progesterone creams can be very helpful to give a little bit of a bump in progesterone, but predominantly it's the micronutrients. Remember that if you apply, walk away tonight as if you apply these things, I don't expect you to be estrogen dominant anymore. And whether you're estrogen dominant or progesterone deficient, the magic that happens when you apply this common sense baseline behavior is that your body knows how to balance itself. You don't have to then try to play biochemist with all these other things. You take these actions and a lot of this stuff corrects on its own. Lisa wants to know, does soy intake increase estrogen? It increases phytoestrogen, so it can increase estrogen-like behaviors. So soy intake might not be the best move if you're already over estrogen dominant. How can menopause be delayed naturally? You don't delay menopause naturally. You gracefully go into menopause. So a lot of people go into premature menopause, but it's not really menopause, it's hormone disruption. For example, one of the side effects of gluten in terms of estrogen is ovarian failure. Gluten can actually cause ovarian failure, creating what's called pseudomenopause or false or fake menopause. And so a lot of women go into this early thinking they're in menopause, and then when they go gluten-free, grain-free, change their diet and their lifestyle, they start having a cycle again. That actually is a very, very common scenario. I see it a lot in women who are in their 40s that think they've gone through an early menopause when in fact they've actually had ovarian failure as a result of poor diet choices. So that can all heal and come back. Can males and females revert back to their natural body after eliminating the processed foods? Sure, but it's not just about eliminating processed foods. It's also about all the other behaviors as well. And if you want, Lang, if you want a complete breakdown of that, get you a copy of No Grain, No Pain, and just, burn through that book in a weekend and start applying it in a big way. Would a complete hysterectomy increase or decrease estrogen? Mary wants to know. Mary, a complete hysterectomy is going to decrease estrogen, and that's a different kind of scenario. A lot of women are, that have had the hysterectomy, a complete or even a partial hysterectomy where they've reduced their body's capacity to generate its own estrogen naturally. Look, aside from my opinion about the surgeries, I think most of them are not necessary and women get railroaded into them. But if you've had it done, there's no point in like living in the past. You got to move into the future. So if you've had a hysterectomy, you are probably going to need a little bit of estrogen. What's important, if your doctor's prescribing you estrogen post hysterectomy, is that you monitor your estrogen and progesterone levels. Like monitor them every 6 months or so and make sure you're not creating an estrogen domination scenario where you're creating more problems by trying to resolve that lack of estrogen production as a result of the post-surgical outcome. Let's see. So I do bio test. Is this not safe? I also take NP30. I'm gonna assume, okay, progesterone is what I'm assuming you're taking, but have made many changes to clean eating due to being diagnosed with Hashimoto's. That's great, Michelle. Keep following your doctor's orders in that regard. But you want to, again, when you start making real diet and lifestyle changes, a lot of times the hormones that people are being put on, the hormone levels become too strong over time. And so then you start manifesting the side effects of having too strong of a dose. So just keep that in mind. Work with your doctor to naturally taper yourself off of those, and work with your doctor to do that, because it needs to be a slow taper, not a fast taper if you've been on that medicine for any length of time. Okay. Let's see here. Can estrogen dominance cause pain or prevent healing from an injury? Generally, no. I mean, yes, theoretically it can, but generally no. Estrogen dominance, it's usually estrogen deficit that can delay healing and slow down healing. Has research been done to see the effects of adrenaline and cause of autoimmune due to the overproduction of effort? Yes, it has. Too much adrenaline elevates, adrenaline is produced by your sympathetic nervous system. And so it elevates your fight or flight response and throws your body into a chronic state of basically of sympathetic nervous system dominance, which is the same thing as saying you're in chronic stress. Does chronic stress contribute to autoimmune disease? It absolutely does. So when your body is chronically overproducing adrenalines, you've got to figure out why that's happening. And for most people, there's either a food-based cause or a chemical-based cause or some type of infectious organism or some type of lifestyle issue that needs to be addressed. So somebody's asking about scleroderma. Agent Orange, scleroderma. Most scleroderma patients I notice live near dirty water sources. My experience with scleroderma, look, I've seen scleroderma do really, really well, and it's not just dirty water, although certainly chemicals in the water can play a role. Remember, scleroderma is autoimmune disease, and like any other form of autoimmunity, there are 4 triggers, categorically speaking. There's chemical exposure, food triggers, there's nutritional deficit triggers, and there's microbial imbalance triggers that have to be ruled out in order to be able to make meaningful changes that are going to have long-lasting impact on the disease progression. Okay. Any suggestions for elevated homocysteine levels of 13? Yeah, B vitamins. B vitamins. Technically there's 4 B vitamins that lower homocysteine. B12, folate, B6, and vitamin B2. Vitamin B2 oftentimes gets left out, but it's necessary as well. It plays a role in that methylation of homocysteine to methionine. So those things. Additionally, S-adenosylmethionine can help elevations in homocysteine. But generally speaking, that's not a very high level, Flower. 13 is not super high. And so that elevation should be able to bring it under control with B vitamins. So, get on some B vitamins and then ask your doctor to monitor that homocysteine level. But it shouldn't take longer than about 3 months to really see a drop from 13 down to below 9 on that homocysteine level with just some B vitamins. Now, if it's not coming down with B vitamins, you may have a different problem. And so that's a little bit more of a complicated issue. Some people with kidney damage or with chronic vascular inflammation have problems with reducing homocysteine with B vitamins. But try the B vitamins first. What type of fat are good to reduce estrogen dominance? So it's not a type of fat to reduce. Saturated fat from man-made sources like your trans fats, your vegetable oils, etc., those are horrific for you. So just throw those away. If you've got any of those in your pantry or any of those in your food repertoire, just get them out, throw them away. Beyond that, the worst types of fats to promote an estrogen dominance come from meats where the animals are fed a lot of hormones or the animals are given hormones. So you don't want, again, this is why our rules around meat. It's not that meat is bad. It's that farm-raised meat from a factory farm where there's more of a hormone issue and involvement, where that fat is going to have excessive amounts of potential hormones that could be detrimental to you. So those are the things that you want to avoid. Essential oils that can help with menopause. There's a lot that can give symptomatic comfort with menopause, but none that are going to cure menopause. Remember, menopause is not a disease. Menopause is a natural state of life. If you're struggling with the symptoms of what a lot of doctors call menopause, like the hot flashes, the night sweats, the hair loss, the vaginal dryness, the dry skin, the low energy, the brain fog, it's probably not the menopause. It's probably more the hormonal imbalance as a whole. So getting the hormonal imbalance under control is the best thing that you can start doing. Again, start with these behaviors that we talk about tonight. Marie wants to know if I consider annual checkups such as pap smears and breast ultrasound to be really necessary for control purposes when there isn't any pathology. Look, it's a case-by-case basis, Marie. I personally, I think pap smears are overrated. And I think that breast ultrasound and breast mammography, like those screening tests for breast cancer, I think a lot of that stuff is overrated. And I think a lot of it creates a lot of excessive diagnoses of problems that wouldn't be problems if you let the body run its natural course. But that's my opinion. You've got to base it on who you are as a unique person, because some people, you know, like they stress out if they don't have the annual checkup. So the stress of not having the annual checkup is a greater degree of impact on their health than actually having the checkup. So it's kind of a case-by-case basis. But I think, again, my opinion on pap smears and ultrasound is that they're really quite overrated. Is it possible to have balanced estrogen, progesterone taking birth control pills? No. Not really. You're going to create an imbalance. Remember, birth control pills, we didn't talk about this tonight. I didn't get into it, but birth control pills are known to deplete, to cause a deficiency of vitamin B2, vitamin B6, zinc, B12, and magnesium. So when you're taking artificial or drug-based estrogens, these nutrients are being robbed from your body. Now, going back to what we talked about over here a minute ago, I mean, we said that to properly metabolize magnesium out of the body in a safe and effective way requires B12 and B6, requires B2, requires magnesium. And here you are taking medicine that actually depletes those nutrients. So it creates a toxicity effect. So, and, you know, I don't really, you know, birth control, I know it's a personal decision. It's not me here judging you if you're taking birth control because you don't want an unwanted child, but you know, you really got to take that stuff seriously, because the risk of taking birth control, if that's the reason you're taking it, when there are other methods of birth control, to me, the risk is greater than the benefit in that regard. Last question, because we got to wrap it up here. Gina, do you recommend a low estrogen birth control? I asked to be put on them for my anemia and took 2 slow iron for 6 months to get my iron levels back to normal. I have scleroderma diagnosed, not 11-18, after years of doctors telling me I'm okay. Okay, so no, I don't. I recommend asking the bigger question, which is, why do you have anemia? Because even if the birth control is being taken to stop you from having a cycle and losing the iron in your blood loss, you should have adequate iron coming in and being absorbed from a healthy gut that you should be able to recover without having to take iron and be on a birth control pill to stop your period so that you're not losing iron. There's something deeper going on, most likely there, Gina. It's very common for people with scleroderma to be gastrointestinally damaged and have malabsorption syndromes as a result of years of gluten exposure. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of linkage to gluten and being a major factor in leading to scleroderma. And some of those symptoms are also malnourishment or malabsorption related, because gluten damages the GI tract. And so you know that iron is the #1 deficiency linked to gluten sensitivity. So I would look deeper at why you're having to do that. That's just my opinion. So take it for what it is, but thanks for tuning in and asking the question.